Ladies and gentlemen, there is simultaneous translation provided. For German is channel 1, English is channel 2, and French is channel 3.
So, good afternoon together. Dear Deputy Secretary General, Your Excellencies, dear members of the Executive Council, dear colleagues and honored guests. The first time I have to inform you that the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Mr. Torbjörn Jagland, for unforeseen personal reasons, cannot make the first opening speech. Therefore, the Deputy Secretary General, Madame Gabriela Battaini, will address some words to you. And with this, I give the word to the Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Madame Gabriela Battaini.
Good afternoon to everybody. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me, on behalf of the Secretary General, to open the Observatory's 20th anniversary conference on the important topic of media concentration and transparency in the media industry. In today's age of mass communication, we need to ensure that the values of freedom of expression and cultural diversity are effectively applied in the audiovisual sector, to broadcasting, to cinema, to video, and also to the internet. It is here that the European Audiovisual Observatory has a unique role to play in Europe and as a partial agreement of the Council of Europe. Freedom of expression and media freedom, as guaranteed by Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, is a priority area for the Council of Europe. It is a core element of any functioning democracy and is also essential for the protection of other rights. The expression of certain ideas may offend, shock, disturb, but the absence of freedom of expression is always harmful to all of us. Without critical voices, there are no safeguards against blunders and abuses in the exercise of power, with inevitable negative political, economic, and social consequences. Free speech and other fundamental freedoms are a prerequisite for progress. But how can we know if freedom of opinion and expression are being endangered by media concentration? How can we measure if the media is being controlled by fewer and fewer individuals or organizations? How can we be informed about who has control over the programs we see on television, the films we watch, the DVDs we buy, or the websites that we consult? Clearly, we need to be able to measure concretely how the media in Europe is owned and financed. And we also need to know what European legislation exists to safeguard against media concentration. Hand in hand with the freedom of expression goes respect for diversity. Europe is becoming more and more diversified, and the debate on integration and immigration has become increasingly polarized. The issue of different cultural and religious groups living together in European societies will most certainly be of growing importance in the coming years and decades. I am convinced that if Europe wants to remain a region of peace and prosperity, we have to embrace diversity. But how can we know if media is encouraging cultural diversity by allowing European access to and sharing each other's audiovisual cultures? What is the distribution of European films and TV programs throughout Europe? What are the market shares for national TV channels in each country as opposed to channels broadcasting from other countries? Again, we need solid facts and figures in order to be able to judge. The European Audiovisual Observatory has been successfully providing this very information for 20 years now. The Observatory has been promoting transparency. In other words, clarity of information about the audiovisual sector in Europe since it was created in 1992. Its role in providing parameters for measuring media freedom and cultural diversity in Europe is as important today as it was 20 years ago. This is particularly true in view of the massive technological and economic changes which have taken place in the media over the last 20 years. When the observatory was created, we were not yet using internet routinely in our daily lives. Facebook was only an American college directory of some classmates. Films were still projected in our cinemas from a roll of celluloid. And the first smartphone developed in 1992, and it weighed half a kilo. The observatory has been able to keep up with the transformations in the audiovisual industries over the past 20 years. I am proud, as Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, that the observatory has become an absolute, I say absolute, reference for reliable facts and figures in the audiovisual industries in Europe. I'm also pleased that the links between Strasbourg and Brussels are strong and that the European Union has full membership status in the observatory. Let me conclude by congratulating the observatory for its professionalism and dynamism, both externally and also internally. I would like to pay homage to the whole team, and in particular to its executive director, Wolfgang Kloss, who has very much contributed to this success. I should like to wish the observatory a happy 20th anniversary and to wish you all an enjoyable and productive conference. Thank you.
Yes, dear Deputy Secretary General, outside a little bit of my official concept, I have to say, because the Secretary General Torben Jagland is not here, that he, like you, like the predecessors Terry Davies or Walter Schwimmer in my time, have always supported, as Secretary General of the Council of Europe, this observatory. And the fact that today we celebrate this anniversary is one point that we can work under the umbrella of the Council of Europe. And please transmit my best regards to the Secretary General. I will phone with him tomorrow, and I hope he will be back in office on Monday. There's nothing serious on it. But please, it's my wish, outside of my official things I say, that you give him my best regards on behalf of the whole organization, and thank you. Thank you to you too. Dear Excellencies, members of the Council of Europe, dear colleagues and honored guests, I have given in the past a lot of speeches and statements in the past, but never some like this. Why? It's the anniversary speech, the 20 years anniversary speech. And it is not only this today, it is, and so with this I will start, my sincere thank you to all present here or not present here who have made this anniversary today possible. If you will allow me, I want to look back briefly at the creation of the observatory here in the year 1992. Why 1992 and why Strasbourg? Well, 20 years ago, political decision makers and industry professionals, filmmakers, cinema owners, video distributors, for example, realized that no one could give them the European overview of the audiovisual sector. No one could paint the total picture. In addition, in this time, it was clear that the audiovisual industries, already important, would represent a major economic sector of activity in the future, and this would raise major legal challenges to regulate this activity. So, a sort of European information clearinghouse was clearly needed, and the observatory was born out of this need. Why Strasbourg? Why not Berlin? Why not another city in Europe? In the early 19th, and I've had the chance 1 year ago to speak with the previous mayor of the city of Strasbourg, Madame Katrin Trautmann, on this. It was a clear will of the mayor of the city of Strasbourg to create a so-called audiovisual cluster, a so-called Pôle Audiovisuel, here in Strasbourg. And thanks to this initiative, we was now set up here with the headquarters in the marvelous Villa Schützenberger, près d'ici, 100 meters from the building. But perhaps, and I repeat what I say as my first sentence, most important of all is the fact that the observatory was linked as a partial agreement to the Council of Europe. And by all debates, I say this here public, why the Council of Europe in all these reforms need partial agreements, the observatory, besides other partial agreements, are a good example that for a specific sector, it's good that the Council of Europe now and in the future has this kind of organizational form. Today, 10 years later, you mentioned it in your speech, Madam Deputy Secretary, we are pictured by neutrality, reliability, credibility of our facts and figures. In all my years as service as director, no one has in all these years put us under pressure or paid us to twist the facts. I have visited a lot of countries, and sometimes figures and information we provide was not comfortable for politicians and industries. But never, I repeat, never, I have been asked, can you change something or can you not publish something? And this is a good sign, not only for us. It was never under discussion that we have to accept what we have found out. Today, the observatory has well developed. It is an international reference for facts and figures on the industries. So we have come long a way since our creation in 1992, and in 20 years of the observatory existence, I say it to you, you all know it, the technological and digital revolution have totally transformed our everyday lives. I personally still remember when I want to buy an apple or a BlackBerry, I went to a fruit shop. And orange was used to make marmalade, and cookies were served to children with a glass of milk. Today, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, BlackBerry, orange, cookies, you know it means something different in the context of our work. And I look back to have spoken with Ross Bigham from ACT in the past. We do not know whether we speak in 3-4 years from the television we have today. Probably we need a new name. The internet make a revolution in our sector, And the appel, what I can say today is to the observatory, to you all work in this sector, we have to face this new age. There is no way to close the eyes on this. I will not to be too long and to say on the end some things that looks more in the future. And in order to best use resources in a dramatically changing media landscape and in a globalization of the audiovisual sector, there has no be clear benchmarks in the form of statistical data and analysis. We see today that this kind of information is also necessary to evaluate the success of investments in the private and public sectors. We have more and more the requests from, not only from Brussels, to evaluate the success of a program, and the basis are our figures. And from a legal point of view, you know, we have the two departments, the Department for Information on Markets and Information, and the legal department for legal information. From a legal point of view, media professionals and decision makers are very concerned with the value of intellectual property and the loss of value resulting from piracy of films, TV programs, or video games. We live, you know it, in the age of the so-called pirate parties, for example, who question the very principle of copyright. And in a time of connected TV, when the boundaries between computers and television sets are increasingly unclear, we are questioning, and a lot of regulators are here in the room, who will and how will regulate this sector in the future. In short, the need for reliable information on the audiovisual sector has never been greater as it is today. And for this reason, as director and based on my experience, I'm not 99%, I'm 100% sure that the observatory with its 20 years of experience will continue to be a reference in this field. However, and this has the development shown in the last years, and I say this on the basis of my 12 years experience as director, I appeal to the representatives of our member states, of the European Commission, here today, and of course to our Deputy Secretary General, please safeguard this observatory's future. It is in your hand, not in the hand of the Secretary and the Director, to guarantee the future. We have tomorrow the meeting of the Executive Council. I'm convinced with colleagues we work closely, constructive together, that we come out in 24 hours to a good result. But my appel is more in the future to say, please safeguard this organization. A speech of a director on this occasion is not complete if we not to say some words of thank you. I have done it addressed to you and to the Secretary General, to the Council of Europe, to the House, to the colleagues in the House. We appreciate cooperation with a lot of departments here. I have to say thank you. And a lot of you here in the room know what I mean for an excellent cooperation with the members of the Executive Council, representing the member states in the past, for their unfailing support in the last 20 years. I thank the Advisory Committee, representing the industry, the audiovisual industry in Europe, for their support. And we are nothing, I'm nothing without the team. I thank my team for an excellent support and work in the past. I hope I will see this happen in the future. And I would conclude and say today, my wish is that we, in the same room in 20 years, I hope I can be then with you and others too, we will celebrate the Observatory's 40th anniversary. That means the Council of Europe would still exist, the Observatory would still exist. We would be in another world, digital, internet, we not know what happened, but this would be my wish. And on the action plan of tomorrow, I look around here, I will announce it tomorrow morning. We have to make efforts that finally, it will not be done next year, all member states of the Council of Europe finally will become member of the organization. Thank you for your attention, and we have had a tradition. The Deputy Secretary General has said the anniversary wish in English. I will say it in German language. and then we will hear some other words. So let's say in my mother language, alles Gute zum Geburtstag, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Distinguished Deputy Secretary General, distinguished Executive Director, distinguished representative of the Advisory Committee, dear Mr. Millet, dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my very pleasure to have the opportunity to address you today on the occasion of marking the 20th anniversary of the European Audiovisual Observatory. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. As you may know, my country is still struggling to shed the prefix of a country in transition and to find its place within developed democracies. I work for the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I still remember my early days in this job 14 years ago when I first came across the observatory website and how helpful it was for me then. Joining the observatory at that time seemed like a mission impossible, and yet here we are today, members for 2 years and holding the presidency in this anniversary year. Holding the presidency of the observatory this year has brought us even closer into the observatory family and has been a valuable experience for myself, my organization, and we are very proud of it. Esteemed guests, as I represent the Executive Council here today, please allow me to say a few words about what we do. The observatory members are represented on the Executive Council. We approve the observatory action plans and also provide the finances to carry out the work planned through our membership contributions. We nominate the executive director and stand as a guarantor for the work of the observatory and its finances. In this way, the Executive Council has been the backbone of the observatory for the past 20 years. Most of us come from various ministries, communications, culture, or telecommunications. I myself work for the regulatory authority in my own country. The topics covered by the work of the observatory are very relevant for all of the European countries, and we are no exception. From my point of view, the observatory's information is just as relevant to the work of the Executive Council as it has ever been. On behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina Presidency, I would like to thank my fellow members of the Executive Council for their work this year, and also to previous presidencies for their commitment. Besides, I would also wholeheartedly like to thank Mr. Kloss and his team at the Observatory for their hard work and loyalty to their organization. Finally, on behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina Presidency, I wish the European Audiovisual Observatory every success for the next 20 years, and as we say in Bosnia and Herzegovina, sretan rođendan.
Bonjour, Madame la Secrétaire Générale Adjointe, cher Wolfgang, chère Helena, cher Monsieur Millet, Mesdames, Messieurs. Je m'appelle Ross Bigham, je travaille pour les chaînes télévision commerciale européennes à Bruxelles, mais je m'exprime aujourd'hui en tant que membre du comité consultatif de l'Observatoire. Plus spécifiquement, je m'exprime au nom du président du comité, Monsieur Benoît Ginisti. Benoît m'a demandé de vous présenter ses excuses, qui ne peut pas être parmi nous aujourd'hui, vu qu'il a une mission professionnelle aux États-Unis. J'ai cru comprendre qu'il est à Los Angeles et non pas à la Maison-Blanche à Washington, mais on ne sait jamais. Alors, c'est quoi ce comité consultatif? Je vais vous expliquer, je le ferai en anglais qui est plus confortable pour tout le monde. What then is the Advisory Committee? The Advisory Committee gathers together representatives of television and film producers, of commercial and public broadcasters, film distributors, platform operators, academics, on-screen talent, trade unions, platform operators. In short, the many thousands of talented people who make up the European media business and who bring their creative vision or take the financial risk to ensure that you as consumers have a range of great content to watch on television, in the cinema, or increasingly these days on other devices. I imagine we are also a major part of the Observatory's client base for its reports. But we don't just read the reports published by the Observatory, we also, and the clue is in the name Advisory Committee, we also give advice on the sort of information which our sector needs, whether in statistics, legal analysis, or the invaluable databases operated by the Observatory. Now, we have a fairly broad membership in the Advisory Committee, and the media business, I admit, has many opinionated people in it. So probably the advice we give to Wolfgang and the team is often contradictory, ambiguous, or just out of date. You can disagree later. But certainly Wolfgang and his team always take our advice in very good spirit. Probably because the one thing we can all agree upon is that the media business has changed beyond all recognition in the past 20 years. The point's already been made more than once. If we can look back 20 years, and I'm slightly conscious of that for Bosnia, a 20-year anniversary has come thick and fast these days. And if you'll permit me, Helena, 20 years ago in the television world, things were very, very different. European content markets in those days were entirely national. Everybody watched programs from their own country. Today, while for obvious reasons national content is still strong, European viewers can watch locally adapted versions of the same content through the rise of the program format, something that was unknown 20 years ago, and interestingly is probably the only area of the European audiovisual sector where Europe has a positive trade balance with the US. 20 years ago, the phrase internet search engine did not exist. I checked that on an internet search engine, so it must be true. Even if we had known 20 years ago what a search engine was, it would have been impossible to foresee the central and sometimes controversial role that these operators will play in our discussions around European media policy. Because among the many public bodies which we deal with at the ACT in Brussels, the Observatory has been exemplary in the way it has kept up with, evolved with, and sometimes set the agenda for our sector. I've been in Brussels for 12 years, same time as Wolfgang's been in Strasbourg. And in that time, the Observatory now plays a much more prominent role than it did 12 years ago in our work. The Observatory not just keeps up with the developments in our sector, but frequently sets the agenda by being the first to highlight upcoming trends. I don't have a scientific analysis to back this up, but certainly the words, has the Observatory done any work on this, are now heard much more frequently than they once were at our meetings in Brussels and elsewhere, and the answer is usually yes, they have, or they're about to. So congratulations for the last 20 years, Wolfgang. For the next 20, you, like the industry which you observe, faces a challenging but exciting and positive time. Our sector will continue to evolve, and as we do, new issues will arise. In Brussels these days, we spend much time talking about privacy and data protection. But what is interesting is that we're not doing this to the exclusion of the familiar issues. Old favourites like protection of minors are still very popular, and you will discover this very shortly when we stop talking and you can start discussing media pluralism. Media pluralism was relevant 20 years ago, it's relevant today, and it will be relevant in 20 years' time. But the substance of what we talk about when we look at media pluralism is evolving. People are now less concerned, or will be less concerned, with how many newspapers one can own, and perhaps more concerned with the role of intermediaries and aggregators on the internet. Because we in the sector, and you, regulators, observatory people, academics, and everyone else, we have a challenge to simultaneously look at these new issues, to look at the future, while also dealing with the mutations and changes going on in our familiar issues. In our case, in the business, in the audiovisual sector, we have to also confront the biggest challenge of all, which has already been mentioned, it's the internet. The internet is a phenomenal tool, has done a lot for progress in society, in politics, and in business, but it has also brought with it an engendering of a culture which says that audiovisual content, or content generally, can be taken for free and shared willingly. We in the television sector and our colleagues on the advisory committee from the film business, we have a shared vision, which is that Europe continues to build on the best of our current, of what the sector currently offers by having a high quality, high investment sector which competes on content. How do we do this in the internet world? It won't be easy, but we will get there, I promise you. Wish us luck in the next 20 years. We wish the Observatory luck. We wish you a happy birthday. Thanks.
Dear Madam Secretary General, dear Wolfgang Klaus, we have known each other for a while now. Dear Mrs. Mandich and Ross Begum, it was just a clin d'œil for Ross. I will start my speech opening in English, but I will revert to French in order to preserve a kind of diversity in languages in such a forum, which appears to me really important. Cette célébration du 20e anniversaire de la création de l'Observatoire me ramène, moi, plus de 25 ans en arrière, puisque c'était déjà avant la création, à une époque où nos gouvernants accordaient une place éminente à la culture dans toute la construction européenne. Après avoir conçu et imposé le projet Eureka, destiné à multiplier les coopérations technologiques entre entreprises et institutions européennes, le président François Mitterrand, à l'époque, avait évoqué l'idée d'une déclinaison de cette même philosophie dans le domaine audiovisuel et cinématographique. C'était début 1986, mais la gauche française ayant subi un échec retentissant aux élections législatives du mois de juin 1986, il fallut attendre sa réélection en 1988 pour remettre sur rail le projet, à l'époque, Eureka audiovisuel. Je fus personnellement requis, je le dis avec regret à l'époque, de quitter le poste de consul général à Los Angeles, la Mecque du cinéma et de la télévision, pour rentrer à Paris et prendre en charge cette tâche qui apparaissait aussi exaltante à ce moment-là qu'à première vue impossible. Ainsi naquit le concept des premières assises européennes de l'audiovisuel, là aussi au sens large, ce n'était pas simplement l'Union européenne et le Conseil de l'Europe en faisaient partie, et j'eus le privilège de l'organiser conjointement avec le commissaire Jean Dondelinger, à l'époque commissaire luxembourgeois à la culture, auquel je tiens à rendre un hommage aujourd'hui parce que ce travail fut tout à fait, cette coopération exceptionnelle. C'est à cette occasion que le président Jacques Delors affirma avec force que les œuvres culturelles ne sont pas des marchandises comme les autres. Et ce fut le moment aussi où le Conseil de l'Europe se préoccupait activement des dimensions, il continue d'ailleurs, politiques, culturelles, éthiques, de tout ce qui concernait les médias. Madame Lalumière était à l'époque très engagée sur ce plan-là, et je m'en souviens. C'était le temps où avait été élaborée, ici même, dans ce bâtiment, la Convention européenne sur la télévision transfrontière, et au sein de l'Union européenne, enfin de la communauté européenne à l'époque, la directive Télévision sans frontières, adoptée le 3 octobre 1989, c'est-à-dire au lendemain même de la clôture des assises européennes de l'audiovisuel. C'était le temps où l'un des objectifs majeurs de l'Europe était celui de la création d'un espace audiovisuel européen dans un contexte, à l'époque, très volontaire, d'ouverture vers l'Europe centrale et orientale. C'était pas le temps, je dois le dire, où l'alpha et l'oméga allaient devenir, pour toute politique, celui des postulats du libre-échange et de la libre concurrence à tout crin. C'est pas le temps, arrivé à quelques années de distance, où a commencé le travail de sape de l'exception, de la dite exception culturelle, au travers d'évolutions sémantiques, non dénuées d'arrière-pensée. On est passé de l'exception à la spécificité, puis aujourd'hui à la diversité culturelle, sans doute pour mieux les diluer à l'époque dans une idéologie de la dérégulation qui était tout à fait en vogue, et d'ailleurs, comme toujours, sous le prétexte un peu fallacieux de mieux défendre et valoriser la culture. Je fus, là aussi quelques années plus tard, en 1993, chargé comme ambassadeur itinérant de la France de défendre l'exception culturelle dans le cadre des négociations de l'Uruguay Round, et j'avais pu mesurer déjà à ce moment-là le chemin qui avait été parcouru dans ce sens par d'aucuns. Lors des Assises européennes de l'audiovisuel, 2 projets majeurs sont nés, dont nous pouvons nous féliciter aujourd'hui, Euronews d'un côté et l'Observatoire européen de l'audiovisuel. La création de l'Observatoire est immédiatement apparue évidente à chacun, du fait de la nécessité de disposer d'un organisme public indépendant, neutre et fiable, capable d'observer les marchés, les réglementations, pour pouvoir comprendre au mieux ce qu'était la réalité économique d'un secteur audiovisuel qui entamait déjà une mutation radicale. Les années 80 ont été une période d'ébullition. Nous pouvons aujourd'hui relever le succès incontestable de l'Observatoire et je tiens à rendre hommage à Wolfgang, toute son équipe, André que je connais l'ange depuis aussi longtemps. Chacun d'eux peut être d'elle et d'eux peuvent être fiers de ce succès puisqu'il se traduit par une quadruple reconnaissance. Tout d'abord par le monde professionnel. Et je participais la semaine dernière à Rome, dans cette ville que j'adore, au débat de l'association Eurovisioni, qui, elle aussi, travaille depuis longtemps et qui a toujours été favorable à l'Observatoire. Et c'est sur la base d'un document préparé par l'Observatoire que le travail a été fait pour évaluer la situation de la production et de la diffusion des œuvres de fiction nationales et européennes sur notre continent. Elle a été également reconnue par le monde académique, des universités un peu partout, États-Unis, Chine, Amérique latine, traduit en langue arabe, reconnu également par des organismes officiels étrangers et des organisations internationales qui citent ces publications, soit l'UNESCO, l'OSCE, l'OMC, enfin par les institutions nationales et les institutions européennes. C'est d'ailleurs pas par hasard que la Commission européenne fait fréquemment référence aux chiffres et aux études de l'Observatoire, notamment les études juridiques, ou que le Parlement européen a proposé que l'Observatoire fasse le contrôle, le monitoring des politiques nationales en matière de médias de service public. Cette légitimité a été conquise au fil des ans par l'Observatoire en raison, et je suis sûr que chacun d'entre vous en est conscient, de la qualité de ces informations et de ces analyses, notamment sur toutes les questions qu'on peut dire chaudes auxquelles le secteur est confronté maintenant depuis 2 décennies. Il convient plus que jamais, me semble-t-il, et ça c'est l'ancien diplomate qui parle, de capitaliser sur cet acquis, car l'Europe, et lorsque je parle de l'Europe, c'est l'Europe au sens large. Et l'Europe au sens large, c'est pas une communauté informe, c'est l'existence de pays, de langues, de cultures, d'une diversité qui convient plus que jamais de préserver. Il faut que l'Europe, au sens large, ne rate pas le défi des prochaines décennies. Plus que jamais, la place et l'influence de notre continent et de chacun de nos pays, de nos créateurs sur la scène mondiale, dépendront de sa capacité à nourrir le débat culturel et à influencer l'évolution des idées et des techniques. Or, le recul enregistré par le continent européen est manifeste dans ce secteur par rapport aux concurrents nord-américains, et la raison n'en est pas uniquement d'ordre économique ou technologique. Il est aussi par nature politique, et c'est en ce sens que nos politiques doivent en prendre conscience. Le passage aux États-Unis à 2 reprises m'a fait voir et de près combien le soutien politique apporté par les autorités américaines depuis la fin de la Seconde Guerre mondiale à la diffusion du cinéma est une illustration évidente, alors que le marché américain, lui, est resté très fermé aux productions venant de l'extérieur. Pour ce faire, disposer d'un outil de collecte statistique et d'analyse fiable et performant paraît d'autant plus crucial que nous assistons aujourd'hui à une seconde révolution du secteur audiovisuel qui est marquée par une internationalisation croissante, une multiplication des services et des plateformes de diffusion avec, paradoxalement, je le dis, un risque de concentration accrue et dangereux des plateformes de distribution dans les années à venir. Donc, je veux dire que cette floraison d'un seul coup risque demain de se traduire par des pertes en ligne et une capacité de contrôle de quelques entreprises uniquement sur la distribution dans un premier temps, sur la production et pourquoi pas sur la création ensuite. Donc cette évolution est à prendre en compte, de même que la diversification constante des modes de financement de ce secteur, que ce soit par la fiscalité ou d'autres moyens, et puis l'irruption, liée à Internet notamment, de questions juridiques de plus en plus complexes, notamment à traiter à l'échelle d'un pays donné ou même d'une organisation internationale. Parallèlement, la collecte de l'information dans ce type de situation devient de plus en plus importante. Et c'est un enjeu qui peut devenir vital parce que les grands acteurs internationaux de ce secteur eux-mêmes, qui aujourd'hui détiennent ou contrôlent une grande part de l'information, pourraient être tentés de vouloir l'utiliser dans le cadre de leurs seuls intérêts exclusifs. Est-il raisonnable de ne se résigner à dépendre de plus en plus fortement des seules données contrôlées par des entreprises privées ou de se satisfaire de statistiques offertes par des appareils nationaux de collecte insuffisamment à jour, dans une période de restrictions budgétaires sans doute appelée à subir des coupes? C'est des questions qui sont importantes. Or, c'est à ce moment précis que l'Observatoire, et l'ancien diplomate que je suis, là encore, le regrette, est confronté à un redoutable défi financier. Dès 1987, hélas, la croissance des contributions a connu son premier coup d'arrêt lorsque le pays dont je suis ressortissant, la France, pourtant initiateur de ce projet, n'a pas accepté l'accroissement du budget qui lui aurait permis de renforcer sa capacité de collecte d'informations sur les nouveaux marchés ou d'accroître son expertise en matière de droit fiscal. Je veux dire que lorsqu'on parle aujourd'hui de la distribution sur Internet et des problèmes que l'ensemble des plateformes de distribution européennes rencontrent par rapport aux concurrents multinationaux, c'est un sujet qui est un sujet majeur. Depuis 2011, le budget est de surcroît gelé à la demande d'un petit nombre de membres et les restrictions budgétaires appliquées par plusieurs pays font craindre un accroissement des difficultés à assurer la collecte de cette information. La question du renforcement des ressources propres, services, ventes, publications, est donc à l'ordre du jour, comme dans toute entreprise, mais ce n'est pas une réponse très facile, dans la mesure où les ventes de publications sont aujourd'hui confrontées à l'abondance d'une information gratuite, diffusée sur Internet, quand cette même information, au-delà de la gratuité, est également piratée. Et l'ancien président de la Société des auteurs, compositeurs et éditeurs de musique français sait ce que piraterie veut dire dans le domaine de la musique et de la production de disques. Il est certes loisible de se féliciter de la passation de contrats de service avec la Commission européenne et l'EPRAB, puisqu'ils ont permis de renforcer les ressources en personnel de l'Observatoire, mais ils sont parfois accompagnés de contraintes administratives qui peuvent être pénalisantes pour un fonctionnement totalement efficace. Signe de reconnaissance et moyen possible de conforter l'Observatoire, la Commission européenne vient, dans son avant-projet de programme Creative Europe, de proposer d'élargir ses tâches à la collecte de statistiques concernant les autres industries culturelles et créatives. Il s'agit là d'une piste intéressante sur laquelle il convient de réaliser au préalable une étude de faisabilité détaillée afin d'en évaluer toutes les conséquences de caractère statutaire, organisationnel ou financier. Les secteurs qui pourraient être concernés par un tel projet sont ceux de l'économie de l'audiovisuel, lequel pourrait être rapidement étendu d'ailleurs à la radio, à la musique enregistrée, aux jeux vidéo, aux médias, presse écrite, Internet, radio, télévision, dans tous leurs aspects. Je veux dire que l'information, le pluralisme, protection des mineurs, vie privée, ainsi que toutes les autres industries culturelles et créatives, livres, arts graphiques, plastiques, spectacles vivants, patrimoine, tous ces secteurs sont aujourd'hui des secteurs sur lesquels il y a un besoin accru d'information. La coordination de ces travaux concernant les divers domaines dont je viens de parler serait sans aucun doute judicieuse, sinon indispensable, dans la mesure où tous sont aujourd'hui affectés par les évolutions, la révolution, je dirais, générée par la numérisation et la reproduction à l'infini des œuvres dématérialisables, ou impactés par les nouveaux modes de diffusion, de distribution et de consommation inhérents à Internet. Les défis et les interrogations relatifs à la préservation du pluralisme politique, de la diversité culturelle, tout comme les enjeux de la protection des droits de propriété intellectuelle sont communs à chacun de ces secteurs, même si leurs modèles économiques sont, et en toute hypothèse, resteront probablement différents. Il suffit, pour s'en convaincre, d'observer les stratégies développées par les grands groupes multinationaux pour réaliser aujourd'hui que tout se joue simultanément sur l'ensemble de ces marchés. Je veux dire que les 12 ans que j'ai passés à la tête de la SACEM en France, qui gère les droits d'auteur, ou les 6 ans de présidence du groupement européen des sociétés d'auteurs et de compositeurs m'ont permis de mesurer, je veux dire, que l'ampleur des transformations qui sont déjà intervenues dans la décennie précédente, mais aussi d'anticiper ce que vont être les évolutions et les changements encore à venir. Donc, sauf à abdiquer toute ambition en matière culturelle, les États membres et les diverses institutions de l'Union européenne, le Conseil de l'Europe, les organisations professionnelles européennes doivent continuer à porter une attention très forte à l'avenir de l'Observatoire européen de l'audiovisuel. Ne pas le faire serait une négligence coupable, à mon sens, eu égard à la modicité des engagements à prendre pour mettre en œuvre un projet qui est indispensable, car c'est par l'analyse des situations économiques et des données que l'on est capable de préparer une politique et ensuite de la mettre en œuvre. Merci.
Oui, bonjour. Il y a déjà eu beaucoup de remerciements, mais je voudrais, au nom de l'équipe de l'Observatoire, remercier toutes les institutions et les organisations professionnelles qui nous soutiennent depuis 20 ans, et aussi tous nos correspondants, partenaires, fournisseurs de données, sans lesquels nous ne pourrions pas réaliser notre travail. Alors, nous avons décidé, à l'occasion de ce 20e anniversaire, d'organiser cette conférence sur le thème de la concentration des médias en l'appelant Transparence 2.0, avec évidemment un clin d'œil à la nouvelle situation du secteur audiovisuel, soumis à cette évolution déjà beaucoup citée aujourd'hui, cette évolution nouvelle, l'Internet et même l'Internet de deuxième génération. La concentration des médias n'est pas un thème vraiment très nouveau. Le Conseil de l'Europe, les premières résolutions sur la concentration de la presse datent de décembre 1974. En 1978, il y a eu un colloque du Conseil de l'Europe sur l'économie du cinéma où deux experts, qui sont un petit peu les précurseurs de l'Observatoire, Claude de Gand et Jean-Claude Batz, ont mis en évidence l'oligopole hollywoodien, qui est peut-être encore le plus solide aujourd'hui malgré toute l'érosion de ces modalités de distribution, mais qui est toujours là, très présent et très dominant. En 87, au Parlement européen, Roberto Barzanti a présenté le premier rapport sur la propriété des médias. Et le 23 décembre 1992, c'est-à-dire 8 jours exactement après la décision du comité des ministres qui a créé l'Observatoire, la Commission européenne a publié un livre vert sur pluralisme et concentration des médias dans le marché intérieur. Donc, nous n'y vont pas, mais évidemment, et cela a déjà été beaucoup dit, il y a eu beaucoup d'évolutions du secteur, en particulier le développement des plateformes de distribution, l'apparition du rôle des outils de recherche, de nouveaux modèles économiques qui créent de nouvelles possibilités de positions dominantes sur les marchés. Il y a eu une internationalisation des marchés avec des acteurs de plus en plus puissants et qui font d'ailleurs que la Commission européenne est souvent une des rares institutions au niveau international ayant la possibilité de contrer des grands groupes dans leur expansion et leur domination du marché. Et cela a été dit aussi, je pense qu'il est important de souligner que la concentration des médias ne concerne pas uniquement la question du pluralisme de l'information, du pluralisme d'opinion, mais concerne également aussi la diversité culturelle. Alors, par rapport à tout cela, nous pensons que l'Observatoire a évidemment un rôle important à jouer. En 2009, aussi bien le Conseil de l'Europe que la Commission européenne ont publié des rapports méthodologiques sur le monitoring de la concentration des médias et du pluralisme. Et nous pensons que par rapport à ces guides méthodologiques, nous le faisons déjà en grande partie dans la limite de nos compétences depuis 20 ans. En particulier, nous publions évidemment des données sur l'évolution des marchés, sur la concentration des audiences de télévision, par exemple. Nous avons une base de données, Mavis, qui permet d'identifier non seulement les entreprises qui diffusent les programmes, mais aussi à quel groupe de communication elles sont affiliées. Et certainement, nous avons un rôle encore à jouer dans les années à venir si cette problématique est portée par les institutions européennes. Voilà, je ne vais pas être plus long. Je vais passer la parole à ma collègue Suzanne Nicole-Chef qui, elle, pourra présenter nos atouts dans le domaine juridique.
A lot of what I would tell you normally has already been said. Certainly the huge developments of the audiovisual sector, which has put a lot of actually quite common legal questions in a new context, hasn't necessarily altered the questions though, but makes us think much harder as to what the right solutions should be, and even what the right questions and analysis, how do we phrase them. I want to draw your attention to two things that are particularly important in this regard. One is the vertical integration in the market, how companies organize themselves, starting from having a hand on content by producing it themselves or getting really in very favorable deals with content producers to offering these same services in whatever kind they can think of, in whatever form to the consumer, and even having maybe a very close link to the way this offer is then reaching the consumer, so what distribution channel is used. And all of these fields used to be much easier to separate from each other, and that reflects, for example, in competition law, where you could think of well-defined markets, some countries with a tendency to make them as small as possible and then to see whether they are concentrated or not. And in the light of diversity and pluralism, Others have started thinking of whether a market should be rather defined not only in economic terms, but also maybe as markets for information. And I think we will hear in the discussion of the panel a bit more on that. And the other point that I like to highlight as a little prelude is that we have a lot of new players on the market that used not to be there. This has a lot to do with the technical revolution, with people who can control access because they give you the right set-top box, or they provide you with the electronic programming guide. So whatever you want to see, you find it easy or difficult or not at all. So these are all good people that we used not to have 20 years ago, and where legislators have found a lot of problems, a lot of solutions, and again, this is all things that need to be brought to the light. We need more transparency as how these things are handled and how they are regulated. So if today you were a lawyer and focusing on media concentration issues, then you will have to be really a multifunctional lawyer or a big team looking into competition law of various countries with a long series of case law by now also to be taken into consideration. You would need to look at the still existing and quite diverse national media-specific anti-concentration rules, and then a lot of side battlefields concerning access issue, must carry, must offer, and so on and so forth. Now, the observatory, as was mentioned a lot of times, has through 20 years really tried to accompany this development by explaining the legal questions, explaining potential solutions, and I was digging a little bit in my private archives, and I came to an iris from 1995. Ad, that's yours. Where actually this has already in it a short report on pluralism and media concentration written at the time by a colleague from the European Commission, and he raised 10 questions and answers on the Commission's work. And information society was one of the questions, and some few answers in there. Now, 20 years into the observatory, and roughly, I think, 16 years, 17 years later, we have this, which you found in your bag, and this is the latest effort to try to bring more transparency into the legal situation. Now, I think I have talked enough, and it's time for our panel to add this discourse, and I want to just briefly explain what we have in mind. So the first speaker will be Ben Keane. He's sitting to the left of Entree. He's senior analyst with Screen Digest, and also since a very early day, a stronghold of delivering information to the observatory. Ben will bring to life for you the developments of the world digital market, illustrating emergence of new digital platforms, impact that they have had on concentration, market bottlenecks, dominant positions, access to market, gatekeepers. I hope all of that will be in there. Before, with this practical background, actually we will then shift to the right side and to Bernd Malzanini, who is the director of the German Commission for Media Concentration, short KEC. And he will introduce the work of a regulator, a very special regulator, who really focuses especially on media concentration. But now, this is a country example. We are living in Europe, and we need to then enlarge the scope of our discussion, and that will be done, again, on the left side by the second person from the left, Roberto Mastroianni, who is a professor at the University of Naples teaching European Union law and media law, and he will tell us a little bit about the legal framework that we have in the European Union. Roberto also is not an unknown person to the observatory, quite to the contrary. Since 16 years, he contributes to our work all sorts of wisdom, and we thank you for that, Roberto. Now, last but not least, the European Union is not Europe, and it's not the observatory. We have a much larger scope, and therefore we have the fourth panelist on the left side, André Richter, who is currently the director of the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media of the OSCE. But to us, he is also and foremost the strong link to the Moscow Media Law and Policy Center, and from the very beginning, a very faithful contributor to a lot of legal publication. And he will enlighten us a little bit how, when you look, for example, from the situation in Russia on media concentration, what we could say in this regard. Now, getting back to square one, I hand over to Ben. It's yours, the floor.
Thank you very much. While the screen's coming down, Andre was just reminding me a little earlier that we first met. It's going to go all the way down and then I'll be invisible. Just a voice. We first met back in 1988 when, of course, I was only 10 years older, obviously, at the time. He was much older. But he published a book back then, which in many respects was a kind of precursor of what he's gone on to do for the 20 years that we're celebrating today. And actually in that book, he cited quite a lot of statistics from Screen Digest, I seem to recall, which kind of set a pattern for the relationship that we've had over these years of Screen Digest being a partner to the Observatory, and I'm proud to have been that partner for these 20 years. So you've heard a lot already today in, I thought, a number of interesting comments in the introductory part of this session, which have referenced this digital age that we now live in, the fast-moving changes that we live in. So I want to try and make some comments about this world, and as only appropriate at this event, draw on some facts and figures and our own particular interpretation. Screen Digest, as you may know, is now part of a much bigger organization called IHS. So what I would like to postulate as an opening comment, really, is that the period that we're in, which really marks the rise of the digital ecosystem. So on one half of this slide, you can see the old world, the old analog world, the old television set, the old video cassette recorder, the new world of connected devices on the other side of the screen. And that's really what I mean by the digital device ecosystem. Devices linked to content, linked to software, linked to the cloud. In particular, that's become a real key buzzword. But the notion that devices are connected to the internet and therefore become much more than a simple device, but part of a connected ecosystem that increasingly companies are making sense of for us consumers. In this digital market, it becomes actually easier and easier to evolve dominant positions in the market. And the very definition of what a market is changing very fast all the time. So when it comes to defining even what we mean by media concentration, I would argue that that becomes harder and harder all the time, because you can only define it with reference to a market. And in the digital age, the market itself, what you're defining as a market, is always changing, is always elusive. So let's have a look, first of all, at the technology side of what's going on, the hardware side. If we take, for example, the smart TV, the connected TV, that big TV in all our living rooms, that itself is a key device we're connecting to the internet. Now, already, if you look on the European side of this chart, you can see 3 companies control 70% of that market. These are cumulative shipments of smart TVs into the European marketplace. If you add together the share of Samsung, LG, and Sony, 70% already. Interesting market position in a key device category. Another key device category, tablets. Mine is just sitting over there. I carry it everywhere with me. A massively important new category. Here you can see the evolution of that category in global shipments. You all know that market is dominated by one company, Apple. 60% of the shipments in the last quarter that we recorded on a global basis. Actually, that market share, despite increased competition, is probably going to get more intense as we go forward, since their launch of the mini version of the iPad. Probably even more important, the smartphone category. So smartphones increasingly becoming a key device in the digital ecosystem. Market increasingly dominated actually by two companies. Again, Apple, and again, Samsung. 50% of all shipments globally this year of smartphones from those two companies. And that's volume. If you look at it in terms of value, then the market shares will be even higher. That translates into the software side of the business. So the operating systems that run smartphones, that create the glue for the ecosystem that hangs together, that creates the ability to have great applications and content through our smartphone devices, that in itself is becoming a duopoly. So if you look at the dark blue part of that chart, that's all Android, that's all Google. The gray part is iOS, the operating system of Apple. So that is rapidly becoming a two-horse race. Some possibility of competition, but a very strong market position there. So what about the impact on content? Well, I've been at conferences, I think, every year for the full 20 years that the observatory's been in existence, where people have talked about video on demand. Well, video on demand kind of finally exists as a viable market. It's about €1 billion market across Europe in various forms. So on-demand delivery of movies and TV content. If you look at that market, device-driven services, by which I mean services of the type that Apple owns, iTunes, for example, of the type that Microsoft runs and Sony runs across devices, they account for more than 1/3 of the total market between them. If you add together the other pay TV delivered services, well, the key brands there, Sky brands, for example, Sky across the UK, Italy, and Germany. If you throw in Liberty Global in all its guises in the various cable platforms that it controls, and you add in Virgin, all those four companies, just four companies, control 50% of that market in Europe. So in digital markets, it appears concentration is a lot easier. What about other business models? That was the paid-for part of movies and TV. How about the advertising business market? Well, looking online at advertising, the key innovation there, of course, was search. We've heard various people already refer to search engines. If you look at the search engine market, everyone in this room, of course, knows the name of the company that dominates that market. It's Google. Now, interestingly, who is the company now in Europe we're relying upon to provide some element of challenge to Google? It's a Russian company. Nice irony possibly in that. So Yandex, a Russian company, actually one of the few elements of competition in the online search market. But the online market is changing. So search is a key part, but this chart shows the growth trends in that market across Europe. And the biggest growth is actually coming in what we call display advertising online. So that in itself is going through a bit of a revolution and a growth. I'm going to show you actually some trends happening in the US market. You can see it's growing and forecast by us to hit $18 billion in 2016. So who is grabbing that market? Well, the big winners, again, Google plus Facebook. Facebook, who was already referred to earlier today as well. You can see some of the other key players there. But what's going on, what's underlying this? Well, a shift in how the dynamics of this marketplace work. So when you look at the shares, we're now showing you this in terms of actual percentage shares. Google and Facebook control 58% of all display by 2016. If you look at all online advertising, so search and display together, you'll see Google will control almost 3/4 of all US online advertising spend by 2016. So what's going on beneath that is that the advertising market on the internet is becoming data-driven. It's becoming driven by algorithms, by machines. And those machines are creating in themselves concentration issues. So the scale and depth of the data that those kinds of companies control is actually unrivaled. They have algorithms that are deciding who sees what adverts 100,000 times a second. Those are incredible numbers, incredible engines, scientific engines driving this business. What you see on that dark blue part of the chart at the bottom is the rise of machine-driven advertising sales. That's a dynamic part of this market, what we call programmatic buying of advertising, changing the market entirely. So actually, one of the real battlegrounds coming up, one of the real digital media marketplaces, is perhaps not one that Andre's ever really looked at, which is the consumer itself and control over the consumer, and actually the identity of consumers. So one of the massive, interesting trends that we think is worth looking at is the control over IDs, identities, consumer identities. What you see on this chart is the growth in control of consumer IDs by key players in the digital media marketplace. Now, if you look, for example, and I don't want to dwell on this too long because I've only got 10 minutes to talk to you, but if you look at Apple, for example, on that chart, you can see 435 million IDs that Apple controls. So that is people who have entered all of their details. Everyone, of course, have read all 25 pages of legalese before they signed up to that contract and attached their credit card to every single one of those contracts. But Apple controls far more consumer IDs than any broadcaster, any pay TV operator, any mobile operator, any telco, anywhere else on the planet with credit cards attached. Enormous amount of power. Facebook doesn't have the credit cards attached, but still has a lot of control over consumer data, as of course does Google. And we're seeing this process accelerate. We're seeing it accelerate through the development of the cloud. So through the cloud, account growth happening very fast. You can see just, for example, the trend with Apple there over the last 3 years, the growth very fast. Also, the growth for Google very fast. So I think this marketplace is a very interesting marketplace, but becoming increasingly difficult to define and to really capture in classic terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. As you were a bit long, I will shift directly. I will refrain to raise various questions that I would like to discuss with you and give directly the floor to Ben to explain what, to give us an explanation of what is done in Germany. One of the few examples, if not the only one, example of public body in charge of monitoring the concentration of the TV market.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy anniversary. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here with you. I have only 10 minutes not to explain you all the finesse and speciality of German media concentration law, but I will firstly give you a short overview on that, what the KEC is, its mission, about the regulatory framework, and how we try to achieve transparency in our media market. Secondly, I will speak to the topic if and how this framework of media concentration control in Germany is suitable for the digital age. So, the KEC, Commission on Concentration in the Media, is a joint institution of the German states. It is created in 1996 to promote a uniform standard of national media concentration control. The KEC serves as a special agency to all of our 14 state media authorities. It is important to know that it is independent and it is financed also by the state media authorities. The KEC consists of 6 experts specialized in broadcasting and commercial law, and additionally of 6 legal representatives of the state media authorities. Also important to know is that all the members of the KEC are not subject to any instruction. Yeah? Okay. Better now? Okay. Something about the mission of the KEC. The mission of the KEC is firstly to ensure a so-called plurality of opinion in nationally transmitted private television by preventing a so-called predominant impact on the opinion-making process. Second task of the KEC is to achieve more transparency in all matters regarding the development of concentration in the media. How we fulfill these tasks, this is made by involving to procedures, all procedures concerning nationwide applications for TV broadcasting licenses and in any change to broadcasters' ownership structures. The regulatory concept, as I mentioned before, is to prevent a predominant impact on the opinion-making process. And for this, the lawmakers had chosen a so-called audience share model. That means that so-called predominant impact on the opinion-making process is legally assumed if a company reaches a share of 30%, or the same is legally assumed if a company with all its channels reaches a viewer share of 25%, as well as a dominant position in a related media-relevant market. Related media-relevant market could be a market of radio, advertising, publishing rights, and advertising, something like this. Third possibility to reach such a magic predominant position is if an overall assessment of a company's media activities shows that this corresponds to 30% of a viewer share. Here we see an example of the current viewer ratings in the German market, and you can see here a quite high concentration of media companies. The green shaded part shows you the viewer shares of ProSiebenSat.1 Media AG, one of the big private companies. The violet one are the shares of the RTL Group. And also interesting to see that the yellow-colored part of the sheet shows a viewer share of 30.1%, and it represents more than 180 private broadcasters in Germany. The blue-shaded part shows us the viewer ratings of the public service broadcasters. So, what about transparency? I think it is always good to know, and everyone here in this room knows that it's not easy to find out who is behind the broadcasters. So it is also a very important task of the KEC to achieve here more transparency in the market. And so the Commission is legally obliged to publish every 3 years a media concentration report, every year to publish a so-called annual report, and to publish a list of licensed programs and their owners. All this information you will find on our website, and perhaps it's possible to show you a diagram of ownership structures. No? I have to use the link here, if it is possible, only if it is possible. Because we have quite big part of the website which is reserved to show the ownership structures of the big companies that are involved in the German market. And so you find your examples also for. Okay. I hear we don't have here an internet connection, so I will recommend to visit our website to find this information. Thank you. There you will find also the decisions of the KEC that are all published there. And as I mentioned before, these diagrams of ownership structures and the current viewer shares, and also the viewer shares of the last years. So, as I mentioned before, our regulatory framework is based on a viewer share approach. And perhaps a question for everyone here in this room: what do you think is the most popular media currently, not only in German, but also in Europe? Television, internet, online, newspaper, news magazines, storage media. We have a lot here to choose. Books also. I show you here the facts and figures. You see here the biggest part in green color, 242 minutes a day. No idea? Internet, television, radio? No? What? TV. Yes, you're really right. 242 minutes a day media usage of television in Germany. Second place is the radio. Third place, the internet with 83%. And then following here the newspapers, magazines, storage media, and books on the last place. Now you may ask, this is the whole average of our population in Germany. What are young people doing today with media consumption? Here are the results for this group of people between 40 and 29 years. And here we have a certain difference. On the first view, you could say they are watching not so much TV as the older ones, or the whole average of the population. Only 138 minutes. Radio a little bit more, but internet is here on the second place with 150%. Now you may ask also, what are people doing online when they are using the internet? And interesting also the answer for this question. Most of the people that are using the internet are using this for email traffic, for seeking general information, for communications and something like this, Facebook and so on, social networks. And we see here only this small bars, green shaded 20% video on demand, and TV via the internet is watched by only 11%. So the same figures we have here also for the people of the European Union. This is taken from research requested by European Commission. It is published in the current Eurobarometer, and you see here nearly the same figures. Television is the most used medium in the European Union, and I think in the United States and all over the world. So I think that's all for the moment. Perhaps to say that shows us at least that currently also this viewer rating approach is the right one, but we have also to look for other applications in the media sector, and we have also to look especially for cross-media activities of the companies, especially what are they doing in other media sectors like the internet or the radio or the newspaper market, and we have to find out how we can compare this with the usage of the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Bern. I suggest that we keep the question for the end, and we give directly the floor to other colleagues who will not make a presentation but more comment on the situation. And we will start with Roberto Mastroianni. What, in front of all this development, what can be done at the European level to confront these new trends of media concentration?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So let me first thank the Observatory for having invited me to here today and giving me the opportunity to be present this 20th anniversary of the Observatory, and give the warmest congratulations for the work we have done, some part, for the last 2 decades. So the basic question that I am trying to focus on today is whether or not legislation exists at the European Union level to guard against excessive media concentration. The answer to this question, in principle, is no. There are no European Union rules actually in force specifically devoted to tackle the issue of media concentration. Certainly, general antitrust rules apply, and they may help protecting media pluralism by preventing collusive practices or mergers establishing a dominant position in the media markets. But the effect of antitrust law is limited. Just to give an example, the merger regulation of 2004 is not designed to tackle specific media issues. It considers only mergers with European dimension, and the threshold is rather high. Therefore, many domestic mergers will not fall into its scope of application. In addition, the merger regulation does not provide for any reaction against media concentration phenomena which are not technically dependent on a merger of previously independent media outlets. It is also important to recognize that the same regulation somehow recognizes the specific role of media pluralism, since it expressly allows member states to apply stricter rules in order to protect pluralism in the media. So the question is, may we expect or even demand for a European legislative intervention? To answer this question, it's important to start from the assumption that the European Union does not possess general legislative powers. The institution of the Union can adopt legislation only if, and to the extent that such a power has been formally conferred upon them by member states. And reading the treaties, no direct attribution of competence can be found on the issue of media concentration and pluralism. But this is not the end of the story. The European Union can exercise its competences whenever the proper functioning of the internal markets is negatively influenced by the existing application of different national provisions in any sector which is not expressly excluded from the founding treaties. And this explains why, as a matter of fact, European legislation on media already deals in part with media pluralism and cultural diversity. The first example is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, in particular the rules on quotas of European and independent production, as well as the rules concerning the so-called short news reports. It is important that the rules obliging each member state to ensure that the broadcaster established in the European Union has access to events of major public interest broadcast exclusively by a broadcaster and its jurisdiction in order to secret short news reports are justified by the aim, and I cite the preamble to the directive, to safeguard the fundamental freedom to receive information and to ensure that the interests of viewers in the European Union are fully and properly protected. Further, but still limited, support may derive from the application of must-carry rules, that is, the obligations of fair and non-discriminatory access that the member states are entitled to impose on undertakings providing electronic communication networks for the distribution of broadcasting services. The same applies to the so-called telecoms package, which does give indirect benefits on information pluralism, at least in terms of guaranteeing any newcomer access to given infrastructures and or resources essential to broadcasting of audiovisual media services. I am convinced that without intervention harmonizing legislation at European level, the current legislation fails to offer full and effective protection of media plurality. But is there a legal basis for a European Union intervention? An analysis of national provisions on mass media ownership and transparency brings out the fact that there are different parameters to define position prejudicial to pluralism: number of channels, control, resources, audience share. Moreover, the various national legislations in Europe adopt different solutions to tackle position prejudicial to pluralism and contain diverging rules concerning compatibility between lato sensu political activities and ownership or control of mass media. Finally, whereas some countries impose obligation to ensure transparency of media ownership as well as financial transparency, other countries still have not adopted such rules. These differences, taken from the viewpoints of the European Union competences, endanger the functioning of the internal market by hindering the right of establishment and the free movement of services. In brief, the complexity created by a patchwork of different national rules discourages companies from entering new markets, in particular where subjects holding shares in immediate undertaking also play a significant role in the political arena. This justifies, in legal terms, the full competence of the Union to take action through an approximation of national laws, and as a general rule in shaping these new provisions, the Union is required to uphold the highest protection of fundamental rights, as guaranteed by the European Union legal order, in particular the freedom of information as enshrined in Article 11 of the European Charter. The final question is whether cultural interests may lead countries to privilege certain content and certain content providers, and whether there is an incompatibility between a market-based system and cultural interests, and whether or not this can be resolved into the European Union legal system. To answer this question, it's necessary to start from the principle of non-discrimination on grounds of nationality, which is a cornerstone of the European Union legal system. That means that member states are not allowed to favor certain national providers or production at the detriment of other competitors based in other European Union countries. But both in the text of the treaties and in case law of the European Court of Justice, traces can be found of an attempt to reconcile internal market imperatives with national cultural interests. Within the short time at my disposal, I can only mention some of these provisions and judgments, starting from Article 167, paragraph 4 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which is an horizontal provision according to which the European Union is required to take cultural aspects into consideration in its action under other provisions of treaties, in particular when adopting legislation in the exercise of other competencies under the treaty. Article 4, paragraph 2 of the Treaty of the European Union is a new provision introduced by the Treaty of Lisbon, according to which the Union shall respect the national identities of member states as enshrined in their constitutional structure. Some may argue that this provision can be invoked in defense of national cultural identity. Finally, in the context of the internal markets, national cultural needs may be invoked by member states as the European Court of Justice calls it, overriding reason in the public interest, capable of justifying a restriction on the exercise of fundamental economic freedoms guaranteed by the treaty. Such restriction needs to be justified when it's suitable for securing the attainment of the objective that which it pursues and does not go beyond what is necessary in order to attain such an objective. Cultural interests are often invoked by member states before the European Court of Justice in order to justify national measures restricting internal market freedoms. And as testified by, to give just an example, the Uteca judgment of 2009, the Court of Justice is ready to accept cultural objectives, whether they do not pursue in reality pure economic interests. Thank you for your attention.
So if you're still with us, you have by now understood already the complexity of the work of the observatory, because you have seen the landscape, you have seen a specific example from one country, and you have seen a very complex, complicated European picture, which we do not expect you to digest right away. But we are still not there. We still have to look at the other parts of Europe where we don't even have this still to be formed framework, or only partly formed framework of the EU. And that leads us to Russia. And interesting, when we prepared for the conference, André mentioned that, look, if I see the data, I get the impression they don't have a media concentration problem. Maybe André has more to say.
Thank you, Susanna. And I would like also to thank you not only as moderator of this session, but to thank you and your predecessor, Ed Van Loon. Where is Ed? Raise your hand, please. As heads of the Department on Legal Services of the Observatory and moderating the work of the partner organizations, one of which I represent. If I may, I will speak a bit wider, not only about Russia, but also about neighboring states. Actually, to do that, we need all certain flashback. But I'm not going to talk about the 20th history of the observatory audiovisual sector. I rather refer to the situation in Russia and some of the neighboring states, which is really more than 20 years backward in comparison to European Union and Western European countries. I cannot say that there were no attempts of restrictions on media concentration, or that all of the attempts failed. There were quite a number of attempts to ensure transparency of the media in Russia and the CIS countries. But the actual situation with the media concentration is so backward that we should really speak about 20th century affairs and not 21st century affairs. If I may talk about 15 countries which which became independent after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were initially guided by a single piece of legislation, which was probably the first and the most serious attempt to put up with the concentration of the media markets in the former Soviet Union. That was the USSR law on the media of 1990. But the aim of that law, which was successfully made and achieved, was to destroy state publishers, which ran all of the print media in the USSR, and destroy the monopoly of Gosteleradio, or the main television and radio authority in Russia, in the Soviet Union. That happened, but when 15 countries appeared on the territory of the former Soviet Union, they very soon started to develop their own recipes for dealing with media concentration, and most of the recipes turned out to be quite weak. At the same time, at least four countries at least, put quite strict and effective rules in the media laws, and they are Armenia, Georgia, Lithuania, and Moldova, which spoke about particular elements that media operations need to follow, mostly dealing with transparency of the media, but also with limitations of the number of licenses a particular company can have, or share of the market that a company may have in the media. There were also restrictions put in those countries on who may own media outlets, and those restrictions were put, for example, for members of the parliament or members of the government, so as not to have a new elite taking place, the former communist elite. Another group of countries, such as Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, they, despite having constitutional, even sometimes, ban on media monopolization and media concentration, failed to do much in this field, and unfortunately, in most of those countries, media concentration is not regulated in the case law, is not regulated in practice, and unfortunately, we cannot speak about real achievements done in these countries. A third group of countries, which are Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Russia, Ukraine, and Estonia, they present a case of quite murky state of affairs, because the law is very vague about media concentration, and the actual things, the actual affairs are also quite shady. In fact, if I may quote one of researcher, and she correctly noted that deals done in other areas of the economy are much more significant, complex, and oddly enough, more transparent than deals done in the media field. In the media sector, despite all the scandals, there is no practice of publishing accounts and details of proprietors or reports of acquisitions and takeovers. That is why it is so difficult to exactly know what is happening in the market. The real owners of the media outlets are discovered only if there is a scandal related to a particular media company, when the investigative journalists try to figure out who is behind the so-called nominal owners of the media companies. And to take one case, Channel 5, which is one of the most important television channels in Ukraine, this channel belongs to a company which nobody actually believes that this company runs this channel indeed. And different political players and economic players claimed their ownership of the channel, which was also never proven, and the audience was very much disturbed by that. And only after almost governmental investigation into that, it turned out that it was controlled by two foreign owners, one from Belgium, but those owners in their turn were controlled by a company which was registered in Cyprus and probably run by Ukrainians who registered that business there. Well, anyway, at least in that country, in Ukraine, there is a rule that are more or less similar to the rules in the European Union countries, in some of the European European Union countries, trying to detail what percentage of the control a company may have in the television and radio news market, and the number of licenses run by a particular company. Maybe there is no need to limit concentration of the media. Maybe the audience doesn't care. Interestingly enough, the audience in Russia, at least, we made a research several years ago, does care about who runs the media. And the poll that I have in mind had basically two questions. The first was a question as to, do you know who controls the media outlets, the news from which is the main source of news for you? And more than half of those who answered said that they don't know who controls it. The second question, do you think that the owner of such news flow to you plays a role in shaping the news, influences the news that you get? And the absolute majority said yes. So there is concern about the influence of the proprietors of the media, and at the same time there is lack of knowledge on who runs the media. There is one aspect in the countries which I try to describe which differs from the countries of the European Union, and that we have a very strong share of the market which belongs to the state media. And the state media are not public media. There should be no confusion about that, because the state media, unlike public media, have no legal obligation to perform certain tasks. State media are financed through the state budget, but without any rules for such or mechanisms that can guarantee even a shade of independence for the state media. And state media are administered directly by the governmental leaders without any rules as to or qualifications for those who should be appointed or can be appointed as managers of the state media. State media are not significant in numbers, at least in Russia, but in Russia we have a huge number of media outlets, 90,000, which is impossible for any market, not to speak of Russian market. And definitely state media present only a fraction of those 90,000 media outlets. But state media have tremendous influence of the market because they have state subsidies, they have special access to information that is coming from the public sources, they have advertising. In fact, somebody said that state media in Russia are commercial media, and commercial media in Russia are state media, in the sense that the state media are very strong players on the market, on the commercial market, in gaining for, looking for audience shares and circulation. And commercial media are so much dependent on the state that they're state media. Well, anyway, we have a situation when not only Russia, but some of the neighboring countries, such as Belarus, Ukraine, all Central Asian countries, have state media which are quite important in the media market. There is a tendency to get rid of the state media. There is a tendency to sell it, and we can speak as examples the cases of Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, and of course all three Baltic states which sold their state media assets a long time ago. But selling state media is definitely not enough, because the buyers of state media are usually the so-called friendly companies. And as we can see from the case, at least of Moldova, that really disturbs the governments, because the friendly companies are friends of the current government, but they might not be the friends of the next government, which is definitely a problem. We have also in at least two countries, in Azerbaijan and possibly in Russia in near future, a very unusual situation when we have both state and public broadcasters at the same time, alongside with the commercial broadcasters, which is also quite a big effect, which will make quite a big effect on the media market and on the at least the common sense of the audience of what they're watching. Is it a state broadcaster, public broadcaster, or commercial broadcasters? And indeed, in many cases, there is hardly a difference. One last point has to do with foreign ownership of the media, and nobody mentioned it before. I think because we are here talking more or less in the sense of common market of the European Union, and CIS is not a common market. And of course, for each of and every of the state of the CIS, any other country is a foreign country, and restriction of foreign ownership is an extremely big thing in Russia and some of the neighboring countries because of this feeling of threat which is coming from everywhere. Therefore, what we can see and a thing that I can say is a fact is that there is a very strong tendency to limit any attempts to expand foreign ownership in the media market. Well, with that, I would like to wind up my part and leave time for 30 minutes for the questions. Once again, thank you very much, the Observatory, and всего наилучшего.
Okay, thank you, Andrei, and thank you to all our speakers. I think we have indeed half an hour for discussing all the topics, the questions that have been presented. I think one of the points is we are concentrating on media concentration, but one of the trends which was not really quoted is fragmentation. We are, I mean, one of the positive, if I may say so, trends in the internet world is what is called the long tail phenomenon, meaning that thanks to the internet, based on very empirical studies, it appears that the consuming of cultural products is less concentrated around a couple of blockbusters or bestsellers. There is more space for the niche market. There is more possibility for the user to choose what he wishes to see. But then I think one of the result of this is that information on the consumer practices become, and Ben was quoting the importance of the information on ID, and it's a concentration of information on the niche market, which I think is now one of the key elements of dominating the market. And this information, and I'm sorry to say this in front of various of our commercial providers, including Médiamétrie, with providing us the data on audience or TV audience practices. This information is very concentrated. It's very expensive. So my question now to Ben and to other colleagues is, how do you see the possible role of public bodies, of public policy, to make this information more accessible in a way of creating a level playing field for all stakeholders in the field? Or is it possible that not only a couple of big media companies control in detail the information, and that the information that they refuse to provide, information on the specific national market, they will provide you that as a turnover at the worldwide level sometimes. You don't know exactly how the market are fragmented nationally in their turnover. How do you see the role of public bodies or structures like the Observatory in obtaining more information of the major stakeholders?
I think there were various questions there, Andrei, but let me pick off one or two. So, long tail, largely discredited, empirically largely discredited as a model. I think there are elements of interesting ideas in it. the model of being able to have less friction in a distribution platform, in a distribution market, having an infinite shelf space in particular. Those two, make a lot of sense. A lot of companies are exploiting that. Whether that means there's an absence of reliable data on niche content markets, I'm not sure that they necessarily go together. I mean, there's a kind of irony in that the more data-driven markets get, actually, in some senses, the more data there is available. Actually, if you want to, look at consumption of niche audiovisual content, the biggest channel for consumption of niche audiovisual content in almost every Western European market, there's a couple of exceptions, but almost every one is YouTube. And you go to any YouTube page for that piece of content, and you can see how many people have watched it. It's pretty transparent. You don't need to wrap anyone's knuckles to get the data. And yes, in a sense, Google is actively driving some of this with investments in niche content. You're going to see that part of what used to be called television change quite a bit as companies like Google, recently even Amazon, alongside other companies that have come into the European market like Netflix, investing in content and investing in analytics to go with their content business models. And I think that actually is one of the real key changes in the dynamics of the marketplace going forward, is that analytics are critical parts of the media business itself, and the analytics become actually a differentiator and a point of strength for those companies. So I actually perceive that some of the data, in a sense, about the market will get harder and harder to access, because it is precisely what separates one company from another, is actually owning that data.
Thank you. Susanna rightly suggests that we deconcentrate demonopolize or de-oligopolize the capacity of speaking, and that we give the floor to the audience. Are there any questions to our panelists?
You may also come forward and just giving your own observation where you are in your field and you're always in the audiovisual media, where your problems with media concentration or with the non-transparency of certain businesses lies. So anything that you like to put forward or questions to the presentations you have heard so far.
If there is no question, we have a list of questions that
we can continue endlessly. So, no one?
No one? They're so shy.
Olga. And Olga, I'm very pleased that Olga is with us, because Olga was in charge of the feasibility study on the Observatory for Eureka Audiovisuel in 1991, something like this.
91-93. Thank you, André. D'abord, je voudrais exprimer mes remerciements au directeur exécutif de l'Observatoire, cher Wolfgang Kloss, et à toute l'équipe, André Lange, Suzanne Nikolchev et tout le conseil exécutif, sa présidente, pour cette invitation, mais aussi pour le fait de l'accomplissement d'un travail très solide pendant les 10 dernières années. parce que la consolidation de travaux de l'Observatoire a été vraiment effectuée cette dernière décennie, et j'insiste, et ce qui vraiment a donné d'outils de meilleure perception du marché et en fait une plus grande contribution à la transparence du marché. Mais le fait d'être responsable de la mise en place de l'Observatoire m'amène à réfléchir beaucoup sur les questions de l'Observatoire à venir. Et je pense que ce sera sa meilleure période. Et la meilleure période, pourquoi? Parce que l'Observatoire aura un champ d'action beaucoup plus vaste. Monsieur Ben King a fait vraiment une présentation très, très impressionnante de ce qui se passe aujourd'hui en matière de concentration de médias, en donnant toutes les données disponibles et qui sont vraiment très impressionnantes, comme je dis. Et je crois que ce qui va se passer, c'est l'ouverture d'un champ d'action pour l'Observatoire. Si l'Observatoire élabore d'outils nouveaux dans ce sens, dans le sens de la meilleure compréhension du marché audiovisuel en Europe, d'outils qui disposent aujourd'hui, mais qui peuvent être aussi améliorés dans l'avenir. Et je crois que ça relève beaucoup du champ d'action d'André Lange et de Suzanne Nicolchef, mais aussi du champ d'action de tous les partenaires de l'Observatoire qui sont vraiment les parties indispensables pour que cet organisme international marche bien dans l'avenir. Alors, un grand merci à Monsieur le directeur exécutif de l'Observatoire qui a vraiment consolidé la vie de l'Observatoire, mais aussi a préparé son avenir. Je vous remercie.
Merci Olga. D'autres questions, remarques? Sinon, moi I have a question for Bernd on you make a reference. You model as the model of market share audience to assess domination or the position on the market of the various group. But if I'm correct, this is still calculated on the basis of the, I suppose, yearly daily audience. Is it still relevant at the moment where the reflection on concentration and is basically based on the concept of relevant market? Can we still today consider that the relevant market is the overall audience on the year for all the TV channels, public channels, generalist channels, thematic channels? Should not we consider that the relevant market is, for example, the TV children programs market or the sport TV markets or the film TV market? And are you approaching the market in this way and calculating market share on specific part of the overall TV market?
Thank you for the question. In line with our plurality of languages, I would like to answer you in German, if I may. Yes, because it's quite difficult also to explain our regulatory model. As I said before, okay, I will change now in German. Der Gesetzgeber hat nicht umsonst dieses Zuschaueranteilsmodell gewählt. Ich erwähnte bereits, dass das Fernsehen das meistgenutzte Medium ist. Und das hat damit zu tun mit der Meinungsmächtigkeit dieses Mediums. Das Verfassungsgericht in Deutschland geht davon aus, dass ein Medium, das aktuell ist, das eine große Reichweite hat und über große Suggestivkraft verfügt, eigentlich die meiste Gefahr in sich birgt, Meinungen zu beeinflussen. Und diese drei Kriterien, Aktualität, Reichweite und Suggestivkraft, das bedeutet, die Kombination von Bild und gesprochenem Wort ist bei dem Fernsehen am meisten gegeben. Ihre Frage jetzt, ob wir hier unterscheiden zwischen verschiedenen Spartenprogrammen, beispielsweise zwischen Kinderfernsehen, zwischen Sportprogrammen oder sogenannten Vollprogrammen. hat der Gesetzgeber eindeutig entschieden. Er sagt, Fernsehprogramme sind an sich suggestiv, gleichwohl welchen Inhaltes sie sind. Das heißt, man unterscheidet nicht zwischen Nachrichtenprogrammen, zwischen Magazinen und Kinderprogrammen, weil in gewisser Weise jeder Transport von Lebensbildern meinungsbildend wirkt. Welche Kriterien können wir noch heranziehen, um eventuell das Fernsehen mit anderen Medien zu vergleichen? Weil wir haben ja eben gesehen in diesen Schaubildern, dass der Medienkonsum speziell bei Jugendlichen sich verändert. Jugendliche schauen nicht mehr so viel Fernsehen über das traditionelle Fernsehgerät, sondern sie nutzen weiterhin Fernsehinhalte. Und ich denke, das ist der wesentliche Punkt. Es wird notwendig sein, zu sehen, auf welchem Weg werden die Inhalte transportiert. Und das haben wir ja anfangs in der Präsentation von Ben sehr schön gesehen. Es gibt heute verschiedene Wege, wie diese Inhalte zu den Menschen kommen. Smart TV, HBB TV, Tablets und alle diese Wege. Letzten Endes wird es auf diesen Content ankommen. Und da müssen wir sehen, wie wirkungsmächtig sind auch andere Medien, zum Beispiel Radio, Presse, Internet. Bei der Presse kann man sehr schön den Übergang sehen. Die Presse verliert eindeutig an Reichweite, das heißt auch an Bedeutung, jedenfalls in der Form der gedruckten Zeitung. In der gleichen Weise gewinnt die Zeitung aber heute mehr Leser in Anführungszeichen als jemals zuvor, weil die Reichweiten der Zeitungsprodukte sind heute wesentlich höher als früher in der gedruckten Form durch sogenannte Extensions im Internet. Das heißt, diese Medieninhalte, die früher gedruckt verbreitet wurden, findet man heute auf Online-Seiten. Jede Zeitung ist heute online erreichbar. Das Problem wird allenfalls sein, wie lange noch kostenlos. Ein Problem bei der Bewertung künftiger Medien, insbesondere dann in diesem Online-Bereich, wird natürlich sein, wie können wir diese Meinungsmächtigkeit, diese Meinungsmacht im Vergleich zum Fernsehen verifizieren. Das heißt, wie können wir die Nutzung des Internets messen? Zuschaueranteilsmessung im Fernsehen ist ein erprobtes Programm, das gibt es seit Jahrzehnten. Das ist eine Währung, eine Einheit, auf die haben sich alle Fernsehunternehmen geeinigt. Ob man aber im Internet jetzt nach Visits oder nach Unique Audience und so weiter die Besuche der Webseiten erfasst, das ist eine Frage, die noch lange nicht beantwortet ist. Das heißt, wir müssen hier Instrumente finden, wie wir diese Angebote im Internet bewerten und gewichten, um daraus möglicherweise einen Vergleich zur Wirkungsmächtigkeit des Fernsehens herzustellen und, wie ich bereits sagte, zu einer Gesamtbeurteilung von Gesamtaktivitäten. Und ich denke, das ist der wesentliche Punkt, crossmedialer Tätigkeiten von Unternehmen über mehrere Medien hinweg zu erfassen.
Vielen Dank. Un des problèmes, je pense, avec la mesure de l'audience, de prendre les critères de part de marché d'audience, c'est un paradoxe. Si vous regardez les données que nous avons rassemblées dans la publication, dans l'IRIS, sur le niveau de concentration dans les différents pays de l'Observatoire, donc niveau de concentration, c'est-à-dire la part de marché cumulée des 4 principaux groupes dans chaque pays, part de marché d'audience quotidienne, on arrive à cette situation paradoxale que le niveau de concentration le plus fort est dans les pays où le service public est le plus fort, où le service public a encore des parts de marché importantes grâce en général à un financement solide. La part de marché du service public est une part de marché en termes économiques, mais en termes de pluralité, on peut discuter, mais le service public est quand même probablement un des lieux où la pluralité est la mieux assurée. Donc il n'y a pas nécessairement adéquation entre part de marché d'audience et pluralité. C'est là que je pense qu'il y a peut-être un risque à se limiter à des critères ou à des méthodes d'analyse économique quand il s'agit de mesurer l'impact de la concentration sur le pluralisme et sur la diversité culturelle.
We actually, from a legal point of view, would be very willing to exclude public service broadcasting. It might be that public service broadcasting deserves very special attention from a legal term, which also shows how difficult it is to have a common panel like this, mixing economics and legal parameters without really making clear which one shall have the lead. But maybe Mark Cole wants to say something in this regard. Please, Mark, if you might introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you for the opportunity. Since I am at the University in Luxembourg, I'm a little bit in the midst of the European scene, and because you just mentioned, André Lange, the size of the market, the players on the market, whether public service or not, they all make it, I think, very different from member state to member state of the European Union, let alone beyond the borders of the European Union, what the situation is and how we should evaluate the concentration on the market. Therefore, I think I'm grateful that the panel was put up in a way that we don't only see the maybe the core of the 27 EU member states, not only the Council of Europe states, but beyond that. However, I regret I cannot contribute to the very last point, or at least not at this moment. I would like to pick up the title of the event, Towards Transparency 2.0. And Ben Keane rightly pointed out that one of the biggest concentration issues that we have on the market is the non-European players being present in the search engine market, in the social media market. Now, as a very provocative question, and I know the German system very good, we deal with very specific issues in certain markets on how to answer the challenge of increasing concentration, for example, on the nationwide television channel market. But at the same time, we have non-EU, non-European players which dominate an obviously very important market. And are there answers at all out there how we could challenge that? The problem came first up with the data protection laws of Europe and Facebook. How about concentration issues and non-European players?
Maybe that's also a question a bit for Roberto, to the extent that European law might have an answer. Roberto, if you want.
Well, actually, no, I don't have an answer. No, which is always the basic approach. But I consider this to be a major problem, but speaking of from the European Union powers perspective, I guess it would be difficult to tackle this particular issue, considering that it has to do with the so-called external relations with operators coming from other member states. We have in some from outside the European Union, I mean. We have in some countries still a principle reciprocity. We still have it in Italian legislation, for instance, according to which some economic access to some markets is limited to domestic or European, in a sense, European Union operators, unless there is a bilateral treaty governing this particular situation. So I wonder whether the European Union intends to address the question using its legislative powers. If there's no legislative power for this to tackle the situation, I am afraid that giving single member states the power to decide on the basis of their own legislative approach will give us different situations, different solutions. Therefore, I guess that it will be a good argument. This is a decisive argument, you see. So this is the reaction of the non-European member states. So I could sing a song now if you want to, but so my final answer is that probably a cake is coming for the 20th anniversary. No, really. Probably a good argument for the Commission to tackle this problem and try to individuate the legal basis for international agreements with the non-European member states in order to guarantee transparency and pluralism also in the relationship with the operators based in non-European member states.
Oui, la situation actuelle me rappelle une citation que j'aime beaucoup de Goethe sur les statistiques, où Goethe disait que les statistiques mentent plus que la lumière, ce qui en anglais donne un très beau lie, statistics lies more than light.
I think we might have also to this question a comment then from a regulator in charge of possibly tackling foreign intrusion into German markets, if there is any. Please use your headphones.
Thank you, Susanne. Only a short answer to Mark Cole. Die Frage zu beantworten, warum wir Transparenz herstellen, muss man auch darauf eingehen, denke ich, dass diese Frage richtig zu beantworten ist im Hinblick auf Unternehmen, die wirklich Meinungen beeinflussen können. Und im Hinblick auf diese amerikanischen Unternehmen, die, glaube ich, hier implizit angesprochen wurden, Facebook zum Beispiel oder YouTube, stellt sich die Frage, denke ich, ob dies überhaupt hier der Fall ist. Wenn wir uns die Aktivitäten von Facebook anschauen oder der Nutzer, die Facebook benutzen, so ist doch hier ein Unterschied zu sehen zu traditionellen Medienunternehmen, wie wir sie bei Fernsehunternehmen zum Beispiel kennen. Facebook-Nutzer werden in der Regel andere Nutzer auf Inhalte hinweisen, die sie interessant finden. Facebook ist, soweit ich das sehe, kein Inhalteanbieter, das heißt, stellt keine Inhalte zur Verfügung, die ihrerseits meinungsbeeinflussend wirken können. Was dort passiert, ist allenfalls ein Lenken auf die Inhalte anderer Medienunternehmen. Und da sind wir wieder bei dem Punkt, den ich eben angesprochen habe. Es kommt auf den Inhalt an. Facebook bietet keine Inhalte. Und von daher wird letzten Endes, wenn man Medienbeeinflussung erfassen will, man dies dort am Ende der Kette tun müssen, bei demjenigen, der die Information zur Verfügung stellt. Und das ist in der Regel ein Rundfunkveranstalter. Das Gleiche dürfte bei YouTube zutreffen, zumindest noch im Moment. YouTube sehen wir jedenfalls zurzeit, it's funny to speak in the darkness, YouTube sehen wir zurzeit jedenfalls allein als Plattformanbieter, der die Inhalte, die User-Generated Content und solche Dinge anderer Nutzer verbreitet und allenfalls sozusagen geklaute Inhalte von Medienveranstaltern, beispielsweise Fußballspielausschnitte etc., ebenfalls mehr oder weniger legal anbietet. Eine neue Entwicklung könnte dann eintreten, wenn YouTube, was jetzt beginnt, mit eigenen Kanälen beginnt, Programm zu machen und dann möglicherweise in die Rolle des Programmveranstalters wechselt. Dann, denke ich, ist es auch wichtig, die Transparenz herzustellen. Wer steckt eigentlich hinter diesem
It does already.
It's on the beginning.
Also, any question?
Oui, Philippe Vialon. Philippe Vialon, Université de Strasbourg. J'aurais une question concernant l'accord qu'on a appris il y a quelques semaines entre la BBC et Google. Est-ce que les experts de la table ronde pensent que cet accord est une mesure qui augmente la concentration des médias ou au contraire qui la préserve? Et cette deuxième partie est peut-être un peu provocatrice, mais je pense que dans la perspective du téléspectateur, elle peut avoir aussi son sens.
Vous faites référence à l'accord, le fait que la BBC va fournir des programmes pour un des channels de YouTube.
Well, maybe for the observatory, I would like to not answer this question, but to make a very clear point explaining further the observatory. I mean, we cannot really predict the future, especially not when it comes to evaluations. That's one of those stop words at the observatory. So maybe that one of the colleagues has an idea on that, but I think André and I would certainly refrain, even if we had a clue.
I didn't hear the beginning. I'm not sure of the exact details of the agreement you're referring to, but I don't see collaboration between BBC and YouTube as particularly more significant than collaboration between BBC and any other distributor or YouTube and any other content provider, to be perfectly honest. In the, and again, this comes back to how you define the marketplaces that you're interested in measuring concentration in. So, if, for example, you look at the online television market in the United Kingdom, so the market for internet-delivered full-length television programs, pretty much all of it is catch-up, so-called catch-up television provided online. Well, the biggest market share in that market is the BBC, and the other broadcasters have the biggest share. If you define the market in terms of overall online video, you would find YouTube having the biggest market share in terms of consumption of all online video. So, it just depends on how you define the market and what your concern is.
Oui, sur cette question, je ne connais pas les termes, le détail de l'accord entre la BBC et YouTube, mais il faut remarquer qu'il y a déjà, la BBC avait déjà auparavant une soixantaine de branded channels sur YouTube et on a recensé plus de 600 formes de branded channels en Europe venant de diffuseurs sur YouTube ou sur Dailymotion. Donc c'est un rapprochement qui est pas tout à fait nouveau. Et moi, j'aurais tendance à interpréter comme une forme de communication de la part de Google et de YouTube par rapport au questionnement du rôle de ce type de plateforme dans les investissements de la production. J'ai fait une estimation, on n'a pas beaucoup de données précises sur les recettes publicitaires de YouTube en Europe, mais d'après les estimations que j'ai pu faire, on doit être autour de 1 milliard, 1,2 milliard d'euros, et que les investissements faits dans ces nouvelles chaînes annoncées le mois dernier, on est probablement aux alentours de 1% de ce chiffre d'affaires. Donc moi j'aurais tendance à considérer qu'il s'agit là plutôt d'une opération de communication pour présenter YouTube comme contribuant à la production européenne. On peut espérer qu'à l'avenir ils contribueront plus, mais ça c'est un débat tout à fait politique.
Maybe if you bear with us, we can have one final question before we give you the promised break with some wetting of the tongue in a different way. Please.
Thank you. My name is Noel Reinders and I represent the Netherlands in the Executive Council. I have a question for Mr. Malzanini. In one of the slides, you indicated that the threshold for dominant influence on opinion formation is 30% of audience share. And I saw in one of the slides that the RTL group in Germany has reached almost this 30% level. So I was just wondering what's going to happen when they pass that level. Are you going to force them to stop broadcasting popular programs, or are there any other remedies for that? Since that really puts, I think, the authorities in difficulties vis-à-vis the freedom of expression and the freedom of enterprise, doesn't it? Thank you.
As I told you before, I tried to explain you only the basics of our media concentration control. Of course, we have the possibility to react on such situations. From 26 to 30, we have almost 4% here in this case. And currently, we have an investigation concerning RTL. And it is not only here the viewer share that is interesting in this case, but it is also interesting what is this company doing, for example, in the online sector, and what are they doing in the press area. And if we would come to the result that this magic limit could be reached, then we have certain possibilities to solve this conflict. we could oblige the company to give up, for example, participations or shares on other media companies, to give, for example, of shares on radio companies and such things. Only in the worst case, we could deny a further license, for example, or withdraw a license. So we have a broad spectrum of possibilities to react on this.
Bien, merci. Je pense que nous devons conclure. Je suis désolé, nous avons déjà dépassé de 5 minutes notre temps de parole. Il y a eu quelques moments d'obscurité dans le débat, mais je pense que nous avons eu une position dominante de la lumière et que nous avons contribué à éclairer le sujet et que nous avons donc contribué à promouvoir la transparence, qui est notre mission fondamentale. Merci à tous les panélistes, merci au public et nous vous invitons à un cocktail qui a lieu au Salon Bleu du Conseil.